Hey guys, today I'm going to try to do a quick summary slash review of the film Drive My Car. Now, I'm not going to bother with my typical YouTube avatar or anything child like that because this was a very serious, very adult natured film and I feel like I need to repay it with the same respect. Drive My Car is a very unusual Japanese film. It's basically a sexual philosophical epic, which is a throwback kind of film that hasn't really been made a lot since the 60s. You see, in the 60s, there were a lot of groundbreaking films. There was a filmmaker named Nagisa Oshima. Oshima was part of a group of Japanese New Wave filmmakers who responded to both the sexual revolution of the 1960s and a parallel group of French New Wave filmmakers. Now, Oshima is one of the most underrated and uniquely Japanese filmmakers I've ever seen. Although he produced 80% of his films during the 60s, he also directed the bizarrely somber David Bowie film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and he's also well known for his two 70s era films, Realm of the Senses and Empire of Passions, but I'm not really a fan of these two. I actually walked out of screaming of Realm of the Senses because I would say it went too far over the line from simple erotica into extreme perversion and kind of lowbrow pornography. Now, the two films I would strongly recommend you watch before Drive My Car are 1965's Etsuraku, aka Pleasures of the Flesh, and 1969's Diary of a Shinjuku Thief. Quickly summing those films out without spoiling them, both of these films are amazing. Both of these films are some of the greatest films I've ever seen. Etsuraku, as far as I know, is one of, if not the first, sexual philosophical epic movie. It's surprisingly underrated. I don't think a lot of people have seen it because it has a pretty kinky title. But it's a Hitchcock-esque film noir story about a man named Atsushi who is totally in love with a girl named Shoko, but Shoko does not love him back. And then after that, a series of freak coincidences occur involving the Yakuza losing a large sum of money, and Atsushi finds it, and suddenly he has enough money to do anything he could ever want to do in the world. Anything that is except get together with Shoko, which is all he actually wants to do. So he proceeds to try and use the money to move on from Shoko, and then the film proceeds to be a case study of this man, Atsushi, who has all the money in the world, trying to get together with 3 or 4 different women. And the film just kind of follows him around and analyzes the different lives he has with these women, and it all builds to this devastating twist ending. Despite that, though, Etsuraku is this massive case study of how the women you choose to be with directly affects and shapes who you are as a man, and vice versa. The different women Atsushi ends up with are all these pretty much archetypal women. You could sum them all up in a single word. She was a mother, she was a hooker, she was a girl. But in the back of his mind, he's always comparing them to the first girl he ever loved, and he can't get over her, and that is why he suffers. So that's Etsuraku. Etsuraku is a masterpiece. Moving on from there, we also have one of my favorite movies ever, Diary of a Shinjuku Thief. So Diary comes out in 1969, and it's a much more psychedelic movie. It's very much influenced by drugs and, the hippie movement. There are parts of Diary that are shot on a home video camera, which is very, very rough for the 1960s. There's also this underlying political subtext of the film that, quite frankly, I couldn't relate to at all because I think you had to know what it was referencing, and I'm just too far removed from college student drama in 1960s Tokyo politics. But what I did relate to is the fundamental relationship between the two main characters. The boy is named Birdie Hilltop. It's a very ridiculous name. And the girl is named Umiko Suzuki. That's a normal Japanese name. Now, the film is kind of all over the place in this analysis / story of their relationship and the philosophical undertone of their own psychology throughout the relationship. And there's a few places where the film just goes full off the rails into a sex and gender studies class. The crux of the film is that Birdie is a kleptomaniac, and Umiko at first seems like a totally normal girl, but she does come from a history of sexual abuse. And as Birdie falls in love with her, it's slowly and expertly revealed through the course of the film that she's also a compulsive liar, and everything she initially told him was completely fabricated. So the film follows their escapades as they move from flirting to dating to being an absolute power couple, constantly excited and thrilled to be in each other's presence, just getting off on each other's like own like hormones and pheromones, painting the town red, just being so super into each other. But despite the fact that they're so super into each other, they have a big problem. And the big problem is that they can't really make it work in the bedroom. Like, even though they both think that each other is the most exciting person they've ever seen, they just can't make it work. So to deal with this, they go to all these different places, they attend couples counseling, they go to college classes, and finally, in the climax of the film, they run away and join the circus. Now, at the end of the film, it's just simply revealed that the two of them, to finally make it work in the bedroom, Umiko had to be the one initiating the sex to therefore get past her own psychological block from her history of abuse. And yeah, it's a beautiful film. It's just about two people in love, and I love it. Now, since the 60s, there have been less and less philosophical sexual epic films. The amount of films dealing with this topic has just kind of dwindled. I mean, occasionally like Woody Allen would throw out one, and there's occasionally like, you know, filmmakers who will throw back to this and like do the occasional exception. One standout example is like Sion Sono's 2008 film Love Exposure. That totally fits into this genre. I love that film so much, but it's like 5 hours long. But it does teach a super important lesson about the way different people process sex and love, and how different people have different measurements of how they reach sex or love. Anyway, let's talk about Drive My Car now. Drive My Car is a sexual philosophical epic film. It's not the best one of these ever made. I'm gonna say that's definitely Etsuraku or maybe Love Exposure in just its insane quest to be the best film of this kind. I also don't think this film is going to win Best Picture at the Oscars, because comparing it to everything that's been nominated, and oh shit, it's a really wide pool this year. I'd say this film is better than Nightmare Alley, better than Dune, better than West Side Story, better than King Richard, and way better than Power of the Dog. But it was not better than the film Don't Look Up, because that movie traumatized my soul in ways you could not imagine. I also have not seen Belfast, Coda, or Licorice Pizza yet, but I keep hearing a lot of good things about them from my friends, and I look forward to seeing them when I get a chance to come across them. Anyway, Drive My Car is a very long film. The underlying theme of the film is theater plays, so the film itself is kind of divided into 3 acts like a theater play. The first chapter is sex. The film literally starts with this woman, Odo Kafka. Odo Kafka is grinding into her husband. They're having amazing sex. Odo Kafka has an abnormal nonsense name, just like Bertie Hilltop in Diary of a Shinjuku Thief. I guess the English equivalent of her name would be like Pussy Galore, like from a Bond film. She's introduced as this perfect goddess of a woman. She's lit beautifully in the light of an Asian sunset, and we're introduced to this somber fantasy film where everyone in Japan is having non-stop amazing sex every day, and they recite dramatically elaborate poetry in silent rooms as they're having sex, during the sex, writing poems about the sex they're having. The first hour of this film, my friend described as William Shakespeare directing a porno. Considering how American films have been shying away from sex, this is honestly a fresh perspective on this married couple who doesn't have children, but they have amazing sex every single night, every single time. And they tie their sex together with roleplay, literature, the finest points of high culture. It's not simply normal sex when Odo Kafka and Yusuke Kafka are doing it. They literally become art, they literally become artists. And on top of that, there are day jobs, they are writers and artists themselves, so. Through sex, they're somehow channeling like the entirety of their essence and like empowering themselves. The first hour of the film is like this holy religious presentation of not only like the greatest sex could be, but how enriching it can be for a couple. And despite this though, because it's a Japanese film, no one ever makes eye contact with each other at any point during the film. Also, you know, considering Japanese people are having record loads of sex, I satirically have to wonder if part of this film was just like a 3-hour commercial for sex, or some kind of, you know, porn parody of the limits and effects of what sex can do for people. Despite this though, the two of them have this seemingly perfect relationship. Oto and Yusuke have tied their sex into their ability to function in society, and for the two of them, having sex is just an everyday normal function like eating. If the need arises to have it, they deal with it as efficiently as possible. So everything's good until one day, Yusuke comes home and he sees Oto having sex with another man. Now, for a variety of reasons, Yusuke just gets his stuff and totally ignores it, sneaks out the front door without interrupting them. He later remarks that he had a certain kind of respect for his wife, and that since his own sexual needs were being met, he was okay with her banging other dudes. I don't know if he's implying, however, that they had a full open relationship, or if that's just the way he was justifying that moment to himself at that time. Now, shortly after that, Oto dies, and this film does that really annoying thing that Japanese films did in the 60s where whenever a character has anything wrong with them at all, it just instantly flash forwards to their funeral a few months later. But the film does it like so many times early on that it seems a little bit comical, and it completely undercuts her death. Now, the film is very clear that she just kind of died of a sudden brain hemorrhage, like all of a sudden for no reason. But there's this underlying guilt and suspicion hanging in the air that either Yusuke was at fault, or he could have helped her, or he could have saved her, or possibly the man she was cheating with somehow caused it to happen. And that brings us to the second chapter. I'm titling the second chapter of the film Work. And honestly, if you want to turn the movie off here, I completely don't blame you. The film blew its load early, and it all goes downhill from here. Whereas Chapter 1 was an amazing artistic expression of what sex is, Chapter 2 is boring as all fuck. Chapter 2 is a super long, super boring rehearsal for an adaptation of the Russian stage play Uncle Vanya, where because of Yusuke's unique art style, all the actors are speaking different languages. And so we have all these people who don't speak the same language struggling to get along in a room together. This rehearsal process is super monotonous and follows his entire production, from the casting to the read-throughs to them doing homework to them doing dress rehearsals. And I guess that's all well and good if you've never seen a play before, but this whole section lasts like 2 straight hours and it's boring as all shit. I almost never say this, but I fully justify that you should just skip the middle of the movie, go make yourself a hamburger, take a nap, or even just straight up fast forward past it. I feel like this film could have been the best picture, but the whole play section that was thrown in here is really just to pad out the runtime and make it a 3-hour feature-length film. This film is 3 hours long, and it totally could have worked in an hour and a half if they just omitted Chapter 2. As an editor myself, I just so bad want to skip the entire second chapter, and I had to just fight myself from passing out of sleep, because literally nothing happens in the entirety of Chapter 2 until the end of it. In Chapter 2, a hotshot actor with extremely high charisma interviews for a sexy lead role, but the director doesn't like him, so he casts him as the elderly Uncle Vanya as some weird revenge at him. Now, they have extremely awkward tension, and then it's revealed at the end of the second chapter that the reason for this awkward tension is that this is the dude who banged Oto the night before she died. And Yusuke cast him in the lead role as part of an elaborate long con to try and get to know him better, and to figure out why Oto cheated with this man, figure out what Oto saw in him. And in the end, it seems that he was just a dumb, young, and stupid, horny muscle man. The director comes to terms with the fact that his dead wife was trying to fulfill her very high sexual needs to achieve her own personal happiness and maintain her own productivity, because Oto Kafka could not work if she wasn't having sex, like, at least a couple times a week. So he didn't stop her from cheating because his own needs were being met, and the whole movie just kind of makes it all the more creepy by having almost no music throughout the entire movie. The movie just has these shallow ambiance tones, wind, and the sound of people talking in cars. Again, it's another throwback to the 60s where Japanese music was pretty minimally used in films at that time. After they finally have their discussion, the horny muscle man was apparently so enraged by this discussion, by this conversation, that he goes out afterwards and beats up a homeless person to death. You don't see this happen, but he's arrested the next day for unintentional manslaughter of a homeless person. Which brings us to the final chapter, Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the chapter I'm going to call Grief. In Chapter 3, after months of working on this boring Uncle Vanya play, since the lead actor has been arrested, Yusuke's producers tell him that he either has to star in the play himself, which is an easy solution because he knows all the lines, or the play will be canceled in 2 days, and everyone will lose a bunch of money and everyone will be sad. Now, despite that though, Yusuke doesn't know what he wants to do, and he's on the fence about it because he's fully depressed about his wife being dead, the fact that she cheated on him, the fact that she cheated on him with like such a loser. And mind you though, that at this point in the film, his wife has been dead for like close to a year, so it's kind of interesting that so long after the event, he's only now just having this breakdown. So, a minor point in Chapter 2 was they gave Yusuke this driver to drive his car because for insurance purposes, he couldn't get into a car accident, so they had to have someone drive him around, hence the title of the movie. The car driver is this mousy, average-looking lady. And over the course of Chapter 2, they slowly got closer to the point where I thought they were building up to she was going to become Odo's replacement and become his new girlfriend, but that's not where this movie was going. I really thought this was some kind of redemption film and Yusuke would fall in love with her, but ultimately they just become friends. So they have this random conversation, and in Chapter 3 they drive across the country to see a hole in a snowfield where the driver's childhood house used to be. And when they finally get to this hole, which is like literally on the other side of the country in like a snowfield, they like have these breakdowns. They try to get over the dead people that they both lost. And it's a very emotional and cathartic scene where you just feel bad for them. And it's very interesting to contrast the scene at the end with Yusuke at Odo's funeral at the start of the film, because he didn't break down at the funeral, but he's breaking down here at this hole with this driver he barely knows. And anyway, after that, that's kind of the end of the movie. They go back to wherever they were, and the director acts in his own play, and the play is a success. Despite how much the play was built up in Chapter 2, in Chapter 3, it doesn't matter at all, and they just kind of move past it as fast as possible. The film has a final epilogue where I guess the director gave away his car to the driver, and then the driver moved to Korea with it. I have absolutely no idea why she did move to Korea. That seems completely out of left field to me. I didn't see that set up at all. But again, the driver was very, very poorly defined as a character, and you really never learn anything about her, aside from she used to live in this house that's now a hole in the ground. So, yeah, the ending's a little weird. I guess him giving away the car was some kind of symbolism for him finally giving over Odo. And yeah, that's the movie. Anyway, this was not the best movie. It lays down a firm philosophy in terms of sex, that sex is good, that sex enriches your life, that married people should be having sex every day, that sex means a lot to its protagonists, and that they need sex to be productive, healthy people. The first chapter in this film is really the entire movie, and it sets the stage for, what sex means to these people, that Odo was the human embodiment of sex itself, and simultaneously the perfect woman, the best woman there ever was. The second chapter, though, is just fucking grueling. The second chapter is just an exercise in work, the definition of work, kind of like expressing what work is, and everyone knows what work is, so I feel like that's unnecessary. It revels in the monotony of work. And there is the subtext in the second chapter that all these actors in the play have different languages, they don't have anything in common, and there's a communication barrier there. That was a little bit interesting, but they never do anything really inspiring with it. It's just kind of there as a running, subtext. And then the third chapter is suddenly about confronting, dealing with, and accepting loss. And it was okay. I really enjoyed Drive My Car. It's not the best film that came out this year. It's not the best Japanese sexual philosophy epic either. So I gotta begrudgingly give this film a 6 out of 10. If it had just been the first chapter by itself, I might have given that a 10 out of 10. Pros, the first chapter is a fucking masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of sex. It's a masterpiece of what a woman is. The third chapter is pretty okay too. A lot of cool driving scenes in the third chapter. Overall, this was an interesting film with a message, which I feel like we haven't gotten a lot of in American film lately. Cons, the second chapter is a boring disaster and really needed to be re-edited, if not omitted from the film entirely. Alright, so that was Drive My Car. I need to get that off my chest. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Do you guys want me to do more serious videos like this? let me know. Thanks. I've been Buster Green. I'll be around. Bye.